Imagine waking up one day to find a debt from centuries ago landing on your doorstep, a debt you didn't incur but are asked to pay. How would you react? This is the scenario we're exploring today as we delve into the topic of reparations for Black Americans. A subject that, like the metaphorical debt we just discussed, traces its roots back to a time long past, yet continues to influence the present. To fully grasp the concept of reparations, we first need to understand the historical context. Picture this: an era of bondage and exploitation spanning over centuries, known as slavery. Black people were ripped from their homelands, forced into labor and denied basic human rights. Even after the abolition of slavery, the chains of systemic racism didn't fall off overnight. Instead, they morphed into new forms. The post-slavery era saw the rise of segregation, a system that further marginalized Black communities, depriving them of equal opportunities in education, employment, and housing. Fast forward to today, and we still see the echoes of this systemic racism reverberating through our society. It's evident in the racial wealth gap, in disparities in education and health outcomes, and in the overrepresentation of Black individuals in the criminal justice system. So, when we talk about reparations, we're not just talking about a payment for an old debt, we're talking about a potential mechanism for addressing these historical injustices and their enduring effects. Reparations could take various forms. Some propose direct cash payments, while others suggest more structural solutions like educational and economic opportunities, community development programs, or initiatives aimed at closing the racial wealth gap. However, there is no consensus. The idea of reparations remains a hot topic of debate and discussion, sparking diverse and often polarizing opinions. This is the reality that confronts us when we discuss reparations for Black Americans. A historical debt, unpaid and unsettled. Why should America pay reparations to its Black citizens? Let's delve into the reasons. The call for reparations is not a new one. It has roots stretching back to the immediate aftermath of slavery, when the promise of 40 acres and a mule was made to freed slaves as a form of reparations. This promise was not kept, and the failure to provide a foundation for newly freed Black Americans has had lasting effects. Let's consider the lasting impact of slavery and systemic racism on Black Americans today. Slavery was not just a horrific violation of human rights, but it also laid the groundwork for systemic racism that has persisted for centuries. Its legacy is still felt in many areas of American society, from education to housing to employment. In terms of wealth, the median white family in the United States has 10 times the wealth of the median Black family, a gap that has remained remarkably consistent over time. But what about the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and other legislative measures aimed at addressing racial disparities? While these laws have had significant impacts, they have not fully eradicated the systemic barriers that Black Americans face. So, what might reparations look like? There are many ideas on the table. Some propose direct cash payments as a tangible recognition of the injustices suffered. Others suggest that reparations could take the form of targeted investments in Black communities, such as funding for education, housing, and economic development programs. These reparations could help address the racial wealth gap and offer opportunities for upward mobility. For example, reparations could fund scholarships for Black students, helping to close the education gap and providing a stepping stone to higher-paying jobs. They could also be used to support Black-owned businesses, fostering economic growth in marginalized communities. Community development programs are another proposal. These could range from affordable housing initiatives to investments in healthcare facilities, providing services that are often lacking in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Reparations are not just about monetary compensation. They are also about acknowledging past wrongs and taking active steps to rectify them. It's about recognizing the role that systemic racism has played in shaping the current state of affairs and committing to a more equitable future. This does not mean that reparations would be a silver bullet that would solve all racial inequities, but they could be a significant step in the right direction, a way to start closing the gaps that have persisted for far too long. In conclusion, the case for reparations is rooted in a desire for justice. It's about acknowledging the long-lasting effects of slavery and systemic racism and taking tangible steps to address these injustices. Reparations, in the eyes of its advocates, represent a tangible step towards rectifying historical wrongs and promoting racial justice. However, the idea of reparations is not without its critics. What are their concerns? It's a question that invites a myriad of responses, each reflecting a different perspective, a different understanding. One of the main arguments against reparations is the issue of practicality. Critics ask, how would the logistics work? There are about 40 million African Americans in the United States today. How do we determine who qualifies for reparations and who doesn't? Is it based on ancestry, on personal experience, or on current economic status? And once that's decided, how do we calculate the amount? What's the yardstick? Is it the economic value of the labor extracted from enslaved people? Is it the accumulated wealth gap because of systemic inequality, or is it a symbolic figure? The practicalities of implementing reparations are a daunting task, filled with complexities and ambiguities. Another concern raised is one of fairness. Critics question whether it is fair to ask today's taxpayers, many of whom have no direct connection to slavery, to pay reparations. They argue that such a move could potentially further divide the society along racial lines. It's a point that brings into focus the delicate balance between addressing historical injustices and maintaining social harmony. There's also the belief among some that enough has already been done through existing civil rights legislation. They point to the progress made since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. They cite affirmative action policies, the election of an African American president, and the increasing visibility of African Americans in prominent roles as signs of progress. Some argue that these achievements are evidence that the system, while not perfect, is gradually correcting itself. However, critics of this viewpoint argue that while there have been significant strides made, the racial wealth gap persists. Systemic racism continues to exist, and the social and economic disparities between white and black Americans remain wide. They argue that these realities underscore the need for reparations. But those against reparations often counter that the focus should be on creating equal opportunities in the present and future, rather than trying to compensate for the past. They propose that efforts and resources should be directed towards improving education, creating more economic opportunities, and fostering a society where every individual, regardless of their race, has an equal shot at success. The debate around reparations is far from straightforward. It's a complex issue that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our history and our present. It asks us to consider the relationship between past injustices and present disparities, and it challenges us to think about how we can create a more equitable future. For these individuals, reparations might not be the best way to address the racial disparities in our society. But as the conversation continues, one thing remains clear: the need for a serious, honest, and inclusive dialogue on how to right the wrongs of the past and how to build a more just and equitable future. As with any complex issue, there is a gray area in the reparations debate. Here we find ourselves in a realm of differing opinions, where not all views are starkly black or white. Within the black community, the reparations conversation is not a monolith. There are those who ardently champion the cause, believing it to be a necessary step towards true equality and a redress for the historical injustices of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. They argue that reparations could serve as a tangible acknowledgement of the harm done and the debt owed. On the other hand, there are those who question this approach. Some worry that reparations could unintentionally perpetuate harmful stereotypes, or that they might foster a sense of complacency, taking the pressure off the need for systemic reforms. There are also those who fear that reparations could further divide, rather than unite, creating resentment and misunderstanding among different racial and ethnic groups. The middle ground, the gray area, is occupied by those who perhaps support the idea of reparations in principle, but struggle with the practicalities. What form should reparations take? Who should be eligible? How should it be funded? There's no shortage of proposals. Some suggest direct cash payments, mirroring the 40 acres and a mule promised, but never delivered to freed slaves after the Civil War. Others advocate for educational and economic opportunities, such as scholarships, grants for business startups, or down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers. There are also proposals for community development programs, focusing on improving housing, education, and healthcare in predominantly black communities. However, the lack of consensus on a specific approach muddies the waters. Each proposal has its merits but also its challenges. Direct cash payments, for instance, could provide immediate relief, but determining eligibility could prove a logistical nightmare. Educational and economic opportunities could help close the racial wealth gap over time, but they wouldn't address the immediate needs of those living in poverty. Community development programs could transform neighborhoods, but they would require significant long-term investment and commitment. Moreover, there's the question of responsibility. Who should bear the cost of reparations? Should it be the government, given that it sanctioned and benefited from slavery and segregation? Or should it be private corporations that profited from the slave trade? Or perhaps it should be shared among all American citizens as part of a collective effort to address the nation's historical injustices? These are not easy questions to answer. They require thoughtful, nuanced conversations, a willingness to listen and learn from each other, and a commitment to finding a path forward that is fair and just. Even within the Black community, the question of how best to address the historical injustices and systemic racism remains a complex one. The reparations debate is a mirror reflecting the multifaceted nature of our society and the ongoing struggle for racial justice. It's a conversation that needs to continue, with all voices heard and all perspectives considered. The debate over reparations is far from settled, and it's a conversation we need to continue having. We live in a world that is constantly evolving, where conversations about justice, fairness, and equality are more critical than ever. The topic of reparations for Black Americans is one such conversation. It's a complex, multifaceted issue that demands our attention, our understanding, and our engagement. It's not just about acknowledging the historical injustices of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. It's about grappling with their long-lasting impacts that persist today, from the racial wealth gap to disparities in education and economic opportunities. It's about understanding that these are not merely relics of the past, but issues that continue to shape our present and future. So how can you engage with this issue? Well, it starts with self-education. Delve into the history, the arguments for and against, the different proposals on the table. Understand the nuances, the complexities, the gray areas. Don't shy away from the uncomfortable truths. Instead, face them head-on. Discuss it with others, share what you've learned, listen to different perspectives, engage in respectful, thoughtful debates. Remember, this isn't about winning an argument, it's about fostering understanding, empathy, and progress. And don't forget to advocate for your beliefs. Whether you're for or against reparations or somewhere in between, don't be afraid to stand up for what you think is right. Write to your representatives, participate in peaceful protests, use your platforms to raise awareness. Every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. At the end of the day, it's not about finding a quick fix or a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about working together to create a more just, inclusive, and equitable world. And that starts with conversations like these. Remember, every voice matters in this debate, so make yours heard, and let's keep this conversation about reparations going. Consider this. How would America look today if every treaty made with Native American tribes had been fully honored? A thought-provoking question, isn't it? Throughout history, the U.S. government has entered into numerous treaties with Native American tribes. These treaties were more often than not an exchange, land for goods, money, or services. Imagine the vast landscapes, the rolling plains, the majestic mountains, all once home to diverse tribes and cultures, exchanged for promises of goods and services. The ink on the parchment barely dry, and yet, the story of these treaties is not one of mutual respect and honor. It's a tale of broken promises and unfulfilled commitments. These agreements, these historic documents, they represent a complex relationship between two distinct entities, a relationship that has shaped the fabric of this nation for better or worse. So, let's delve into the history of these treaties, their implications, and the outcomes. Let's uncover the truth behind the written words. The early years of the United States were marked by a series of treaties with Native American tribes. These agreements, inked with the hope of peaceful coexistence, would soon reveal a recurring pattern of broken promises and violated terms. One of the earliest of these was the Treaty of Fort Pitt in 1778. This was the first written treaty between the new United States and any Native American tribes, specifically the Delaware tribe. The United States promised protection and sovereignty to the Delaware in return for their alliance during the American Revolutionary War. However, the promises of this treaty were not fully honored, leading to resentment and distrust. Fast forward to the Treaty of New York in 1790. The United States and the Creek Nation agreed to a boundary line, and in exchange for the Creek's land, the United States pledged protection, supplies, and the promise to respect the Creek's sovereignty. Yet, similar to the Treaty of Fort Pitt, the terms were not fully respected. The Creek land was encroached upon, leading to tension and conflict. Then came the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. This was signed after the United States' victory in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The Native American tribes surrendered a significant portion of present-day Ohio and Indiana to the United States. In return, the United States promised goods and recognition of tribal sovereignty. However, the pattern persisted. The United States did not fully uphold its end of the agreement, leading to further strife and discord. These early treaties, from Fort Pitt to Greenville, were not just individual instances of broken promises. They set a precedent, a pattern of the United States government agreeing to terms with Native American tribes and then not fully honoring those agreements. This pattern of broken promises and violated terms was not confined to these early years. It would continue, casting a long shadow over the relationship between the United States and Native American tribes for centuries. These early treaties set a precedent of broken promises and violated terms, a pattern that would continue for centuries. Perhaps one of the most infamous consequences of these broken treaties was the Trail of Tears. This series of forced removals of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands was a dark chapter in American history, a direct result of the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Indian Removal Act, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, was a policy that coerced Native American tribes into giving up their lands in the southeastern United States in exchange for territory in the West. While it was presented as voluntary, it was anything but. The act was used as a tool to pressure tribes into ceding their lands, even leveraging the threat of American military force. Among the tribes affected were the Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations, known as the Five Civilized Tribes. These tribes had established prosperous communities modeled after the European American style, with written constitutions and public school systems, yet they were uprooted from their homes, their lands, and their way of life. What followed was a series of forced relocations, spanning from 1831 to 1850, that came to be known as the Trail of Tears. Tens of thousands of Native Americans were marched over 1,000 miles across the Mississippi to the Indian Territory. They journeyed through harsh weather, over rough terrain, without adequate supplies or provisions. The suffering was immense. It's estimated that 4,000 Cherokee people alone perished on this journey from exposure, disease, and starvation. The Trail of Tears was not a single event, but a series of tragedies that unfolded over almost 2 decades, leaving deep scars on the Native American communities. This shameful chapter of American history is a potent reminder of the devastating impacts that broken treaties can have on marginalized communities. The Trail of Tears stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of broken treaties. It serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to honor our commitments and respect the rights of all people regardless of their cultural or ethnic origins. The Trail of Tears stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of broken treaties. As the 19th century drew to a close, a new era of treaties emerged. This period was marked by significant treaties such as the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851 and its subsequent iteration in 1868, alongside the Medicine Lodge Treaty of 1867. The Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851 was intended to ensure peace between the United States and various tribes, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. The treaty recognized these tribes' territorial rights and promised non-interference from the United States. Yet, less than 2 decades later, the terms of this treaty were violated. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills, a region promised to the Lakota, led to an influx of white settlers and the eventual displacement of the tribes. In response, the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868 was signed. It aimed to rectify the broken promises of the previous treaty. However, this treaty too was violated when the United States government allowed the construction of a railroad through the heart of the Sioux Nation. Similarly, the Medicine Lodge Treaty of 1867 was another attempt at peace between the United States and the Plains Indians. The treaty promised the tribes extensive lands in Oklahoma in exchange for their agreement to live on reservations. However, these lands were later opened up for white settlement, leading to further displacement of the tribes. Despite the changing times, the pattern of broken treaties continued, with devastating consequences for Native American tribes. These treaties, signed with hope and promise, became symbols of betrayal and loss. The late 19th century, a new era of treaties, was in fact a continuation of an old pattern, a pattern of broken promises and violated terms. This era served as a stark reminder that the pursuit of progress and expansion often came at the cost of the rights and lives of the indigenous peoples of the land. Now, let's turn our attention to the 20th century and beyond. As we step into this era, we see the continuation of the impact of treaties, land disputes, and legal battles that stretched into the modern day. The 20th century was marked by a series of events that further complicated the relationship between the US government and Native American tribes. What was once a pattern of land exchange for goods, money, or services in the 19th century had now evolved into a labyrinth of unresolved issues. The violation or non-fulfillment of many treaties left a bitter taste in the mouths of Native Americans, leading to an era of ongoing land disputes that extended into the late 20th century and beyond. The complexity of these disputes often revolved around the interpretation of the treaties and the rightful ownership of the land. In the midst of these struggles, the 20th century also saw a glimmer of hope. There were some positive strides, such as legal battles won by Native American tribes and the return of some lands. These victories, while not erasing the past, signaled a shift towards recognizing and righting some of the wrongs done. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, we witnessed the emergence of a new trend: the return of lands to Native American tribes. This has not been a simple process, and it's often fraught with legal and bureaucratic hurdles. Yet despite these challenges, there have been successful cases. Lands have been returned, and with them, a piece of history, culture, and identity restored. The legacy of these treaties continues to shape the lives of Native Americans and the landscape of America to this day. The story of these treaties is a reminder of a complex, often painful history. Yet it is also a testament to the resilience of Native American tribes and their ongoing fight for justice and recognition. As we move forward, let us remember the past, learn from it, and strive for a future that honors these treaties and the people they were meant to protect. So where does this leave us? We've journeyed through the intricate tapestry of history, uncovering the patterns of broken treaties between the US government and Native American tribes. We've seen how these broken promises led to dire consequences, from the heartbreaking Trail of Tears to the ongoing socio-economic struggles faced by indigenous communities. Our exploration has shed light on the often overlooked narrative of these treaties, agreements that were meant to be mutual, but were often marred by exploitation and deceit. The ramifications of these actions are not confined to the pages of history textbooks. They ripple through to the present day, affecting countless lives and shaping the cultural landscape of our nation. As we stand at the crossroads of the past and future, we must bear in mind the lessons that history has taught us. As we move forward, it's crucial to remember the history of these treaties and strive to right the wrongs of the past. Have you ever wondered how the land rights of Alaska Natives were resolved in the face of modern America? Imagine a vast, icy wilderness, home to a rich tapestry of cultures and histories. Now picture a clash between these ancient traditions and the relentless march of progress. Intriguing, isn't it? A story of resistance, negotiation, and ultimately, a groundbreaking piece of legislation. This journey takes us back to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. Before we delve into the act, we must first understand the issue at hand. The foundation of the problem stretches back far before the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. To grasp the significance of the act, we need to journey back in time to when Alaska was home to its native peoples, unencumbered by the borders of modern property rights. Alaska Natives, for thousands of years, had lived harmoniously with the land. They hunted, fished, and gathered, shaping their cultures and traditions around the rhythms of nature. Their relationship with the land was not one of ownership in the Western sense, but one of coexistence and stewardship. But as the tide of Western expansion swept over the continent, the vast, rich lands of Alaska became a beacon for settlers and industrialists. Gold was discovered, fisheries and timber industries sprouted up, and the once remote and untouched wilderness became a battleground for resources. The indigenous people of Alaska found themselves in the crosshairs of these developments. Their ancestral lands, once considered communal and sacred, were now being divided, sold, and exploited. The Western concept of land ownership was alien to them, and they found themselves ill-equipped to navigate the legal complexities of property rights. Conflicts ensued. Alaska Natives fought to protect their lands, their traditions, their very way of life. But they were often pitted against powerful corporate and governmental interests. The industrialization of Alaska marched on, and the land rights of the native peoples were increasingly marginalized. As the years rolled on, the pressure mounted. The discovery of oil in the mid-20th century only exacerbated the situation. The land was not just a source of livelihood for the natives anymore, it was now a highly coveted asset, a chess piece in the game of power and wealth. The escalating tensions, the mounting conflicts, the growing disenfranchisement of the Alaska Natives, all these factors coalesced into a crisis that demanded a resolution. The escalating tensions led to the formulation of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. The act, signed into law in 1971, was a monumental moment in the history of Alaska Natives. Known as the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA for short, this legislation was the culmination of years of negotiation and struggle. In essence, the ANCSA was a response to the long-standing Aboriginal land claims in Alaska. These were claims made by Alaska Natives asserting their historical rights to the land. The act aimed to resolve these disputes, but not through the conventional reservation system used in the lower 48 states. Instead, the ANCSA took a unique approach. It proposed a settlement, providing compensation to the Alaska Natives and conveying land to newly formed Native corporations. These corporations were created under the act, representing various Native groups across Alaska. Around 44 million acres of land, an area larger than the state of Florida, was transferred to these corporations. Additionally, nearly $1 billion was set aside as compensation for the natives. The act had several key provisions. It extinguished all Aboriginal claims to land in Alaska, replacing them with the rights granted under the act. It also recognized the Alaska Natives' right to continue their subsistence lifestyle, a vital aspect of their cultural identity. The ANCSA was revolutionary for its time. It was the first legislation of its kind to recognize and compensate Native groups for their historical land claims. It acknowledged the deep-rooted connection between the Alaska Natives and their land, and it sought to preserve this connection for future generations. But the ANCSA wasn't without its challenges. The process of setting up the Native corporations and distributing the land was a complex task. And the act itself was a compromise, a balance between the needs and rights of the Alaska Natives and the interests of the federal government. The act was a significant step, but the journey was far from over. While it provided a foundation, it also paved the way for new challenges and ongoing negotiations. Even today, the legacy of the ANCSA continues to shape the relationship between the Alaska Natives and the rest of the United States. The act was not a magical solution, but it laid the groundwork for further negotiations. In the wake of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA, a new era dawned for Alaska Natives. The act, far from being a definitive solution, was in fact an opening gambit, a beginning rather than an end. It offered an unprecedented framework for land rights and compensation, but it was not without its challenges. The negotiations that followed the act were intricate and ongoing, a continuous dialogue between Alaska Natives, the U.S. federal government, and the newly formed Native corporations. These negotiations sought to refine and adjust the Act's provisions to ensure they would truly serve the interests of Alaska's indigenous people. However, this was no easy task. The Act had been a seismic shift, and the aftershocks rippled through every aspect of Alaska Native life. The newly formed Native corporations had to learn to operate within a capitalist framework, often at odds with traditional ways of life. The division of land into corporate shares introduced new complexities and conflicts. Moreover, the Act's focus on land and monetary compensation did not fully address the deeper issues. The cultural, social, and spiritual dimensions of the Alaska Natives' relationship with their ancestral lands were not easily translated into legal terms. These aspects remained a point of contention and a source of ongoing struggle. The post-Act period also brought its share of legal and political hurdles. Many aspects of the Act were ambiguous, leading to a myriad of legal disputes and challenges. These legal battles, while often grueling and protracted, also served to clarify and refine the Act's provisions. Despite these challenges, the Act marked a significant turning point. It recognized for the first time the rights of Alaska Natives to their ancestral lands. It laid the groundwork for further negotiations, setting a precedent for future indigenous land rights claims, not just in Alaska, but across the U.S. The Act set a precedent, but its legacy continues to evolve. The journey that began with the Act is far from over. Its ripples continue to shape the landscape of Alaska Native rights, a testament to the resilience and tenacity of Alaska's indigenous people. Fast forward to today, the Act's implications are still felt and debated. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, a landmark legislation, continues to shape the landscape of Alaska in profound and complex ways. It's a story of rights, land, and identity that's still being written. as the echoes of the past reverberate into the present. The act was a watershed, establishing native corporations and conveying over 44 million acres of land. But this was not a simple end to a complicated issue. The act didn't just allocate land, it transformed the traditional relationship between Alaska Natives and their ancestral territories, introducing the concept of corporate ownership. Today, the corporations are pivotal entities in Alaskan society and economy. They manage the lands, generate revenue, and provide dividends to shareholders, the Alaska Natives themselves. But the corporations also face criticism. Some argue that the corporate model, with its emphasis on profit and growth, is at odds with traditional Native values of stewardship and communal use of the land. The Act's effects are also seen in ongoing legal battles. Land rights remain a contentious issue. In some cases, disputes arise over the interpretation of the Act itself. In others, Native corporations and environmental groups clash over land use and conservation. These debates are not just about land, they're about culture, identity, and the right to self-determination. Moreover, the Act's impacts extend beyond Alaska. As a precedent-setting legislation, it influences indigenous land rights discussions across the United States and indeed, the world. The Act's legacy is as potent today as it was in 1971. It continues to shape the lives of Alaska Natives and the landscape of Alaska itself. Its effects ripple out, touching on issues of land rights, corporate power, environmental stewardship, and cultural identity. As we look to the future, the Act's implications will undoubtedly continue to be a pivotal part of the ongoing narrative of Alaska Native rights and identity. Beyond the legalities, it's the human stories that truly define the Act's impact. Let's delve into the lives of Alaska Natives and see how the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 has shaped their experiences. Personal narratives are the heartbeat of history, the pulse beneath the facts and figures. Take for instance the tale of a seasoned fisherman from the Yupik tribe. His ancestors have cast their nets in the same icy waters for countless generations. But with the Act came changes. The land, once freely roamed, now had boundaries defined by corporate interests. The fisherman's ancestral fishing grounds were now part of a Native corporation's assets. He grappled with the shift from a communal to a corporate way of life, a transition that echoed across his community. Then we have the story of a young Athabascan woman, a recent law school graduate. She was born decades after the Act was passed, and yet its reverberations touch her life. The land conveyed to Native corporations under the Act in many ways financed her education. She is a testament to the opportunities that the Act has created for younger generations of Alaska Natives. There's also the narrative of an Aleut elder who recalls a time before the Act when the land was not owned but shared, not divided but whole. The Act for him was a double-edged sword. It brought recognition of Native land rights, yes, but it also imposed a Western concept of land ownership that clashed with traditional Aleut beliefs. These are but glimpses into the myriad ways the Act has touched the lives of Alaska Natives. They reveal a complex tapestry of experiences of gains and losses, of shifting cultures and evolving identities. They are stories of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring connection of a people to their land. And it's through these narratives, these human elements, that we can truly understand the profound and lasting impact of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. These stories bring to life the real implications of the Act. The Act is not an isolated incident but part of a global conversation on indigenous rights. As we delve into the broader picture, it becomes clear that the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act resonates far beyond the borders of Alaska or even the United States. This act, with its unique blend of compensation and land conveyance, is a pivotal part of a worldwide dialogue about indigenous peoples and their rights. Around the world, we find similar situations where indigenous communities grapple with the aftermath of colonization. From the Aboriginal people of Australia to the Maori of New Zealand, from the Sami people in the Nordic region to the numerous indigenous tribes of South America, the stories sound eerily familiar. Land loss, cultural erosion, and the struggle for recognition and rights are common threads woven into the fabric of indigenous experiences globally. The Act, in many ways, has set a precedent. It underscores the recognition of indigenous rights, the importance of land ownership, and the need for tangible reparations. It has provided a framework, albeit an imperfect one, that other nations have looked to when addressing their own indigenous claims. In Canada, the Comprehensive Land Claims Policy is an example of a similar approach. where land and resources are negotiated with indigenous groups in exchange for extinguishing their traditional land rights. In Australia, the Native Title Act of 1993 acknowledges the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people over their ancestral lands and waters. Yet it's crucial to remember that each indigenous community's journey towards justice and recognition is unique, influenced by their specific historical, cultural, and political contexts. While the Act may offer a template, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. The Act has undeniably stirred the global conversation on Indigenous rights. It has highlighted the urgency of resolving Indigenous land claims, of acknowledging past wrongs, and of taking steps towards restorative justice. It has provoked thought, incited debate, and inspired action, making it a significant player on the global stage of Indigenous rights. The Act continues to influence global Indigenous rights discussions, reminding us that the path towards justice, though long and winding, is one we must persistently tread. So, where does this leave us? We've embarked on a journey through time, dissecting complex legal texts and delving into the heart of a community's struggle for recognition and justice. Let's take a moment to revisit the key points of our exploration. At the core of our discussion is the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, a monumental piece of legislation that sparked a revolution in the realm of Indigenous rights. This act, a response to the escalating land claims of Alaska Natives, provided compensation and conveyed land to Native corporations in Alaska. But it was far from a simple transaction. It marked a significant shift in the relationship between the United States government and Alaska Natives, setting a precedent for future negotiations and dialogues concerning Indigenous rights. The aftermath of the act was a tumultuous period, with both positive and negative implications. On the one hand, it led to the establishment of Native corporations, providing a platform for economic growth and community development. On the other hand, it also raised questions about cultural integrity, land stewardship, and the long-term impacts of commercialization. Fast forward to the present day, and we see the ripple effects of the act in the ongoing debates surrounding Indigenous rights. The act has had far-reaching implications, not just for the Alaska Natives, but for Indigenous communities worldwide. It has shaped the discourse around Indigenous rights, influencing policies and sparking debates on issues such as land rights, cultural preservation, and economic sovereignty. The human element of this narrative cannot be ignored. Behind the legal jargon and political maneuvering, we find stories of resilience, determination, and a relentless quest for justice. The Alaska Natives, in their struggle for recognition and rights, have shown us the true spirit of resistance and resilience. Finally, we must remember that while this discussion is rooted in the context of Alaska, it carries a global resonance. The struggles and triumphs of the Alaska Natives echo in the stories of Indigenous communities around the world. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act provides a lens through which we can view the broader narrative of Indigenous rights, a narrative that continues to unfold in our contemporary world. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, a landmark in the history of Indigenous rights, remains a potent symbol of the struggle and resilience of Alaska Natives. Have you ever wondered how societies attempt to rectify the immense wrongs of the past? How can we quantify the unquantifiable, the loss, the pain, and the trauma of events such as the Holocaust? In the vast universe of human rights and international law, restitution and compensation stand as twin pillars of justice, striving to mend the wounds carved by historical atrocities. One such atrocity, the Holocaust, has left an indelible scar on the canvas of human history. The enormity of the crime, the depth of the suffering, and the scale of the human loss all make it a daunting task to even begin to comprehend what restitution and compensation might look like. Restitution, in its essence, is about returning what was unjustly taken. It's about restoring the dignity and rights of survivors and their descendants. Compensation, on the other hand, is a monetary salve applied to the wounds of the past. It's a tangible recognition of suffering, an attempt to alleviate the financial burden borne by survivors and their families. Yet these concepts are not without their complexities and controversies. How do you determine the value of a life lost, a childhood stolen, a family torn apart? How do you measure in dollars and cents the trauma of survival, the pain of remembrance, the shadow of genocide? These questions are not meant to paralyze us into inaction, but rather to underline the magnitude of the task at hand. They challenge us to strive for justice, to seek redress, and to remember that behind every statistic, every legal case, every settlement, there are real people with real stories of unimaginable suffering. Today we delve into the journey of restitution and compensation to Holocaust survivors, a path of seeking justice and closure for one of the darkest chapters in human history. The Holocaust, a systematic, state-sponsored genocide, led to the death and displacement of millions of Jews during World War II. This dark period in history is a stark example of the depths to which humanity can sink, and the unimaginable horrors that can unfold when hatred is allowed to fester unchecked. Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazis, with their collaborators, systematically exterminated 6 million Jews. This genocide was executed with chilling efficiency, using concentration and extermination camps, mass shootings, and inhumane living conditions, leading to starvation and disease. The scale of the Holocaust was so immense, its effects so devastating, that it left a wound on the world that still aches to this day. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, the world was left in shock. The survivors were scarred, both physically and psychologically, their lives irrevocably altered. Families were torn apart, entire communities obliterated. Those who survived were often left without a home, their possessions stolen, their livelihoods destroyed. But the end of the Holocaust did not mean the end of suffering for the survivors. They faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from scratch, often in foreign lands, while dealing with the trauma of their experiences. The need for justice, for some form of compensation for their immense loss, became a pressing issue. Governments and international organizations were confronted with the monumental task of providing restitution and compensation for Holocaust survivors and their families. The path was fraught with challenges, legal and otherwise. These efforts were not just about providing financial compensation, but also about acknowledging the suffering of the victims, holding the perpetrators accountable, and ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again. The aftermath of the Holocaust necessitated a colossal effort for justice, restitution, and compensation. In the immediate wake of the Holocaust, the world grappled with the enormity of the tragedy. The first attempts at restitution began. As soon as the dust of the Second World War began to settle, the international community started the daunting task of addressing the widespread devastation and unfathomable human rights abuses that had occurred. The Holocaust, a systematic genocide that claimed the lives of 6 million Jews, left a deep scar on humanity's conscience. It also left an urgent need for justice and reparation. These early efforts at restitution took various forms. One of the initial measures was the return of stolen property. From personal belongings to real estate and businesses, the Nazis had plundered an immense amount of Jewish property throughout Europe. Efforts were made to identify and return these assets to their rightful owners or their surviving relatives. However, these actions were fraught with challenges. Many records had been destroyed, and the sheer scale of the theft made it a monumental task. At the same time, the establishment of displaced persons camps played a crucial role in the early restitution efforts. These camps, set up by the Allies, provided temporary shelter for millions of people who had been displaced by the war, including Holocaust survivors. In these camps, survivors received food, medical care, and other forms of assistance as they began to rebuild their shattered lives. These were some of the first steps towards restitution, an acknowledgement of the atrocities committed, and a commitment to redress. However, the path to restitution was not a straightforward one. It was complicated by political, legal, and practical hurdles, and the sheer scale of the Holocaust meant that these early efforts were just the beginning of a process that would continue for decades. These early efforts marked the beginning of a long, complex journey towards restitution and compensation. Fast forward to the 1990s, a landmark case emerged that would set a precedent for future restitution efforts: the Holocaust victims' asset litigation against Swiss banks. In the aftermath of the Second World War, Swiss banks were accused of hoarding assets that belonged to Holocaust victims. These assets, which included bank accounts, securities, and other valuables, were not returned to the victims or their families. Instead, they were held in Swiss banks away from their rightful owners. In the late 90s, a class action lawsuit was brought against these banks. The litigation was spearheaded by Jewish organizations and survivors of the Holocaust, who sought justice for the millions lost to the bank's actions. It was a complex and challenging case with plaintiffs from all over the world. The litigation brought to light the extent of the Swiss bank's actions during the war and their aftermath. After years of legal proceedings, the Swiss banks agreed to a settlement in the late 90s. This settlement, which totaled $1.25 billion, was a significant victory for the victims and their descendants. It was the first time that such a large settlement had been reached in a case of this nature, and it set a precedent for future restitution efforts. The Swiss bank settlement was not just about the money, it was a symbolic victory, a recognition of the wrongs done and a commitment to righting those wrongs. It was, in essence, a step towards justice. But the significance of the Swiss bank settlement goes beyond the case itself. It was a milestone in the broader context of Holocaust restitution. It highlighted the need for justice and restitution in the face of historical atrocities. It served as a reminder of the importance of remembering and acknowledging the past in order to prevent such atrocities from happening again. The Swiss bank settlement was a significant step, but it was far from the end of the journey. While individual cases like the Swiss bank settlement made headlines, a broader, more systemic approach to restitution was also unfolding on the international stage. In the aftermath of World War II, a global community emerged, committed to making amends for the atrocities of the Holocaust. This led to a series of international agreements and reparations programs, each with its unique goals and strategies, but all united in their pursuit of justice for Holocaust survivors and their families. One such example is the Luxembourg Agreement, signed in 1952. This agreement saw West Germany pledge to pay 3 billion Deutsche Marks to the newly established State of Israel and to the World Jewish Congress. This symbolic gesture marked the first time a nation took responsibility for the crimes committed under its regime, setting a precedent for future international reparations. In the decades that followed, individual countries established their reparations programs. France, for instance, set up a fund in 2000 to compensate those persecuted by the Vichy regime during the Nazi occupation. Similarly, Austria established the National Fund of the Republic of Austria for victims of National Socialism in 1995, providing financial and social assistance to survivors. Despite these strides, challenges persist. Each reparations program has its limitations. Eligibility criteria often exclude certain victims, while bureaucratic hurdles can make accessing funds difficult. And of course, no amount of money can truly compensate for the loss and suffering endured. Yet, these international agreements and reparations programs have been instrumental in acknowledging the past and offering some form of redress. They serve as a reminder of our collective responsibility to confront history's darkest chapters and strive for justice. These international efforts have played a crucial role in providing restitution and compensation to Holocaust survivors and their families. Restitution and compensation for Holocaust survivors is not a closed chapter. It remains an ongoing journey. Even after 7 decades since the end of World War II, efforts to provide justice to Holocaust survivors and their families continue. In the present day, we see various organizations and institutions still working tirelessly to address the wrongs of the past. Governments, legal bodies, and civil society are all part of a network striving to ensure that those affected by the Holocaust are not forgotten. Recent developments have shown that the pursuit of justice is far from over. For example, the issue of looted art, stolen from Jewish families during the Nazi era, is a contentious topic that continues to evoke strong debates. Museums and private collectors are frequently challenged to prove the provenance of their collections, and in some cases, precious art pieces have been returned to the rightful heirs of their original owners. Moreover, the conversation about restitution and compensation has broadened in recent years to include not just financial settlements but also educational programs, public recognitions, and initiatives to confront and learn from this dark chapter of history. Yet despite the progress made, controversies and challenges abound. There are still those who resist these efforts, questioning the need for restitution or arguing about the specifics of how it should be carried out. But these debates, as difficult as they may be, are a testament to the importance of the issue. They show that the world has not forgotten the Holocaust, nor the need to make amends for its horrors. As we move forward, the collective resolve to ensure justice for Holocaust survivors and their descendants remains undiminished. The journey towards restitution and compensation is a complex one, but it is a journey that we, as a global community, are committed to continuing. As we continue to grapple with the legacy of the Holocaust, the quest for justice, restitution, and compensation remains as relevant as ever. The journey of restitution and compensation to Holocaust survivors is a complex and multifaceted one. As we navigate through this intricate web, we've seen the myriad ways in which the international community has strived to acknowledge, rectify, and learn from the indescribable horrors of the Holocaust. The Holocaust victims' asset litigation, or the Swiss bank settlement, stands out as a landmark case, a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice. Swiss banks reached a monumental settlement of $1.25 billion, resolving claims of hoarding assets belonging to Holocaust victims. This case illuminated the lengths to which justice can and should be pursued, even when the perpetrators are institutions of immense power and influence. We've also delved into the various forms of restitution and compensation provided to survivors and their families. Through international agreements and individual reparations programs in different countries, we've seen attempts to provide some form of recompense for the immeasurable losses endured. These efforts, while they can never fully compensate for the suffering, are crucial steps towards acknowledging the atrocities committed and the responsibility we bear to the survivors and their descendants. And yet, the journey is far from over. The quest for justice is ongoing. Every day, new stories emerge, new injustices are uncovered, and new efforts at restitution are undertaken. This is not merely a historical endeavor, but a living, breathing pursuit that continues to shape our understanding of the Holocaust and its aftermath. So, as we reflect on this journey, we must remember its significance. It is not just about financial reparation, it is about acknowledging the wrongs of the past, striving for justice in the present, and ensuring such atrocities are never repeated in the future. It is about understanding, empathy, and the enduring human spirit that perseveres in the face of unthinkable adversity. As we reflect on this journey, we are reminded of the enduring quest for justice, a quest that continues to shape our understanding of the Holocaust and its aftermath. Picture this. The year is 1941. Tensions are escalating globally, and World War II is raging. A time of conflict, of uncertainty. It was an era that tested the bonds of humanity. Across the Pacific, the United States remained relatively unscathed until one fateful day in December. The attack on Pearl Harbor, a day that would live in infamy, shook the nation to its core. This unexpected attack did more than just thrust the United States into the throes of war. It ignited a spark of fear and suspicion, casting a dark shadow over a specific group of its citizens, Japanese Americans. As rumors swirled and paranoia grew, these innocent individuals found themselves caught in a wave of growing distrust and anxiety. This fear and suspicion would soon lead to one of the darkest chapters in American history: the internment of Japanese Americans. In February 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order, innocuously named yet devastating in its impact, was the catalyst for one of the most egregious violations of civil rights in American history. Executive Order 9066 authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders to prescribe military areas and exclude any or all persons from them. While the order didn't specify any particular group, it was quickly applied to a single ethnic community: Japanese Americans. In the following weeks and months, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced to abandon their homes, businesses, and lives. They were moved to hastily built internment camps in some of the most desolate and inhospitable parts of the country. The majority of those interned were American citizens, born and raised under the same stars and stripes as their non-Japanese neighbors. These individuals were not accused of any crime, they were not tried or convicted. Their only offense was their ancestry. A presumption of disloyalty based solely on their race was enough to uproot them from their lives and confine them behind barbed wire fences. This mass displacement was carried out with an efficiency that was as ruthless as it was bureaucratic. Notices were posted in neighborhoods, ordering Japanese Americans to report for evacuation. They were given just days to settle their affairs, pack what they could carry, and say their goodbyes. And so, the internment began. Families were torn from their communities and forced into an uncertain future. The land of the free was now the backdrop of a grim saga where citizens were imprisoned not for what they did, but for who they were. The internment of Japanese Americans would last for the next 3 years, marking a period of profound injustice. An injustice that would leave an indelible scar on the nation's conscience. A scar that reminds us of the dire consequences when fear and prejudice overshadow the principles of liberty and justice. Imagine being uprooted from your home, from everything you know, and placed in a confined space. Envision a life within the guarded fences of the internment camps. These camps were no vacation destinations. They were places of confinement where Japanese Americans were forced to abandon their homes, their dreams, their everyday life. The living conditions within these camps were substandard, to say the least. Imagine a place where privacy is a luxury, where multiple families are crammed into single rooms, separated by nothing more than thin partitions. Picture the communal latrines devoid of partitions, where the basic human necessity of privacy was stripped away. The food, often unfamiliar and of poor quality, was another constant reminder of the grim reality. The lack of adequate medical facilities and the harsh weather conditions, ranging from sweltering summer heat to bitter winter cold, only added to the hardship. Yet it wasn't just the physical conditions that were appalling. The emotional and psychological toll on the internees was immeasurable. The uncertainty of the future, the fear of the unknown, the constant surveillance, all these factors weighed heavily on their minds. Children, who should have been playing and learning in a nurturing environment, were instead growing up amidst fear and uncertainty. The elderly, who should have been enjoying their golden years in peace, were instead living in a state of constant anxiety. But amid all this adversity, the spirit of the Japanese American community shone through. They showed remarkable resilience and determination. They cultivated gardens to beautify the barren landscapes. They organized schools for their children, ensuring that education continued even in the most adverse conditions. They held on to their traditions and customs, maintaining their dignity and cultural identity in an environment that sought to devalue it. Despite these hardships, Japanese Americans demonstrated resilience, maintaining their dignity and spirit even in the face of adversity. They were a testament to the indomitable human spirit, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, hope and resilience can shine through. With the end of World War II in 1945, the internment camps were finally closed. And so began a new chapter for the Japanese Americans who had been unjustly held captive in their own country. But the end of internment did not signal an immediate return to normalcy. No, far from it. The challenges they faced in rebuilding their lives were profound and multifaceted. Imagine, if you will, returning to a life that had been abruptly interrupted. Homes had been sold or abandoned, businesses shuttered, and communities scattered. Starting from scratch was the harsh reality for many. The stigma of internment, coupled with lingering racial prejudice, made the process of rebuilding even more difficult. Yet, in the face of adversity, the Japanese American community showed remarkable resilience. They rebuilt their lives brick by brick and worked tirelessly to regain their place in the society that had once turned its back on them. But the physical and emotional scars of internment remained. The long-term effects were not only personal, but also societal. The internment period left an indelible mark on the collective memory of Japanese Americans and became a poignant chapter in the broader narrative of civil rights in the United States. The fight for recognition and justice was a long and arduous one. For years, the survivors and their descendants campaigned for an official acknowledgement of the wrongs committed during this dark period. They sought not just an apology, but also reparations to symbolize the government's commitment to rectifying past injustices. Though the road was long and fraught with obstacles, their perseverance paid off. The struggle for justice shed light on a painful chapter in American history and ignited a broader conversation about the importance of safeguarding civil liberties, even in times of crisis. It would take more than 4 decades for the U.S. government to acknowledge and apologize for this grave injustice. But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of the internment and the lessons learned continue to reverberate, serving as a stark reminder of the cost of fear and prejudice, and the importance of upholding justice and equality for all. In 1988, a long-awaited acknowledgement from the U.S. government finally came. It was a day of reckoning, of coming face to face with a dark chapter of the nation's past, which had been tucked away for far too long. This acknowledgement took the form of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, a landmark piece of legislation that finally addressed the gross injustice suffered by Japanese Americans during World War II. The Civil Liberties Act was more than just a piece of paper. It was a formal admission of guilt, a declaration that the internment of Japanese Americans was indeed a grave mistake. It was a declaration that the rights of these individuals, rights guaranteed by the Constitution itself, had been brutally violated. It was an apology, an official one, from the highest echelons of the government for an act that had caused untold suffering. But the act didn't stop at an apology, it went further. It offered reparations to those who had been wronged. Each surviving internee was to receive $20,000 in compensation. Consider that for a moment, $20,000, a sum that could never truly compensate for the loss of freedom, the loss of dignity, the loss of years spent behind barbed wire. But it was a tangible acknowledgement, a concrete admission of the wrong done. It's important to remember, though, that this apology and these reparations didn't just happen. They were the result of years of tireless campaigning by those who had been interned and their descendants. They were the result of a long, hard fight for justice, a fight that many thought would never be won. In the end, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 wasn't just about money. It was about recognition. It was about acknowledging a wrong and taking steps to make it right. It was about healing old wounds and moving towards a more just and equitable future. It was a significant, albeit belated, step towards justice and healing. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II is a stark reminder of the dangers of fear and prejudice. In the face of war, over 100,000 lives were irrevocably changed, their freedom stripped, and their dignity questioned. The United States government's decision to intern its own citizens is a chapter of history that underlines the perils of unchecked power and paranoia. In 1988, a formal apology and reparations were issued, a small gesture of reconciliation for the survivors. But the scars of the internment lingered, a testament to the resilience of those affected. This chapter of history is not just a tale of injustice, it is a call to vigilance. It serves as a stark reminder that the preservation of rights and freedoms is a constant struggle. Let this narrative guide us in building a society that values each individual's dignity and worth. While the apology and reparations were important steps towards justice, they serve as a reminder that vigilance is necessary to protect the rights and freedoms of all. Ever pondered the true worth of land ownership and how it impacts one's ability to produce? Throughout history, land has been more than a mere commodity. It has been a symbol of power, freedom, and economic stability. Take a moment to consider the early civilizations where the concept of land ownership was born. From the ancient Egyptians who built their empires along the fertile banks of the Nile, to the mighty Romans who expanded their territories through conquest, land ownership was pivotal. It provided the foundation for economic stability and growth. Now, let's fast forward to the Middle Ages. The feudal system was in full swing, and land was the currency of power. Owning land meant you had a say in the governance of the realm. It gave you the right to farm, to produce, to feed your family, and contribute to the local economy. In the modern era, the importance of land ownership has not waned. Today, land is a tangible asset, a real estate investment that can appreciate over time. It offers the liberty to build a home, start a farm, or establish a business. But beyond these practical benefits, there's a psychological aspect to land ownership. It provides a sense of belonging, a connection to a particular place, and a feeling of security. It's a source of pride, a testament to one's hard work and success. Moreover, land ownership can significantly impact productivity. When one owns the land they work on, there's a heightened sense of responsibility. They are more likely to invest time, effort, and resources into improving it. After all, any increase in the land's value directly benefits the owner. So whether we're talking about an acre in the southeastern United States or a plot in a bustling metropolis, the value of owning land extends far beyond its monetary worth. It's about economic stability, freedom, and the ability to produce. It's about leaving a legacy for future generations. Land ownership, a tangible asset, a symbol of freedom, and a catalyst for production. But what about 40 acres and a mule? Ever wondered about its value in the past? Let's step back into the year 1865, the closing chapters of the American Civil War. The Union was on the verge of victory, and a promise was made by General Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton to former slaves. That promise was famously known as 40 acres and a mule. This pledge was a beacon of hope for African Americans, promising them a chance at economic freedom and self-sufficiency. So, how much were 40 acres and a mule worth back then? Well, the value of land varied greatly, but let's dive into it. In the year 1865, an acre of land could be worth anywhere from $5 to $20, depending on its location and quality. So, if we take the lower range of $5 per acre, 40 acres would amount to $200. That's a considerable sum for that era. Now what about the mule? A mule, being a sturdy and versatile animal, was a valuable asset for farming and transportation. Back in 1865, a mule could be worth anywhere from $20 to $150. So let's consider a modest estimate of $50 for a mule. Adding it all up, 40 acres and a mule could amount to roughly $250 in 1865. But remember, this isn't just about monetary value. This promise represented a chance to own land, to farm, to create a livelihood, and to carve out a future. It spoke to the heart of the American dream, the opportunity to prosper from one's own labor. Sadly, this promise was largely unfulfilled, leaving a legacy of economic disparity that echoes to this day. Yet it remains a powerful symbol of the struggle for equality and the enduring spirit of resilience. Historically, 40 acres and a mule represented a chance at economic freedom and self-sufficiency. Now let's transition to the present day. How much would 40 acres and a mule be worth today? If we were to take a closer look at the southeastern United States, the average value of agricultural land oscillates between $2,000 and $6,000 per acre. For the sake of this discussion, let's consider the lower end of the spectrum, $2,000 per acre. Multiply this by the promised 40 acres, and we're looking at a rough estimate of $80,000. Now that's a sizable chunk of change, isn't it? But let's not stop there. Remember the mule? The value of a mule today, depending on its age and condition, can range from $1,000 to $5,000. For our calculations, let's consider a mule worth $2,000. Add this to our previous total and we're looking at a grand total of $82,000. However, it's essential to bear in mind that this calculation is quite simplified. It doesn't account for inflation, land development, or potential increases in land value over time, but the value of 40 acres and a mule goes beyond the simple financial worth of land and livestock. Imagine the income that could be generated from farming this land, the crops that could be grown, the livestock that could be raised. Consider the potential opportunities for establishing a homestead, a place for a family to live and grow. If we think about the value of land ownership in terms of self-sufficiency, independence, and economic security, then the true value of 40 acres and a mule becomes even more significant. It's not just about the financial worth of the land and the mule. It's about the potential for creating a sustainable and prosperous future. In today's terms, 40 acres and a mule could represent significant economic potential. But what about the ability to produce? How does land ownership influence that? Land ownership is a powerful catalyst for production. It provides the raw materials needed for farming or manufacturing, forming the basis upon which economies and societies are built. When you own land, you hold in your possession the fundamental building blocks for production: soil for agriculture, spaces for factories, or sites for renewable energy sources. Land ownership also gives you the freedom to experiment and innovate. It's like a canvas on which you can paint your own picture of productivity. You can decide what crops to plant, what kind of livestock to raise, or what type of buildings to construct. You can test new farming techniques, try out new manufacturing processes, or experiment with renewable energy technologies. The possibilities are endless, limited only by your imagination and the boundaries of your land. But the impact of land ownership on production goes beyond the physical. There's a psychological aspect to it as well. When you own something, you tend to take better care of it. You feel a sense of responsibility towards it. This sense of ownership can foster a drive to succeed, a determination to make the most out of what you have. Moreover, land ownership can provide a sense of security, knowing that you have a tangible, reliable asset that you can leverage for economic purposes. This security can encourage investment, as owners are more likely to invest in something they own rather than something they rent or lease. And let's not forget about the social impact. Land ownership can empower individuals and communities, providing them with the means to create wealth, improve their living conditions, and contribute to the development of their communities. Land ownership, it's more than just a piece of earth, it's a springboard for production. So, what's the final take on the power of land ownership, you may ask? Well, it's a tale as old as time and as current as the morning news. Throughout this journey, we've traced the footsteps of the 40 acres and a mule promise, from its historical roots to its modern implications. We've seen how this promise, made to newly freed African Americans after the Civil War, represented more than just a parcel of land and an animal. It was a promise of independence, of the ability to sustain oneself and to shape one's destiny. It was a pledge that went unfulfilled, but its resonance continues to echo today. In today's perspective, the worth of 40 acres and a mule is not just a monetary figure. Sure, at the lower end of the range, with agricultural land in the southeastern United States averaging around $2,000 an acre, we're talking about a value of around $80,000. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. This land, this promise, holds potential. The potential to produce, to cultivate, to create. It's about the ability to grow crops, to raise livestock, to build a homestead. It's about the power to create a livelihood, to provide for a family, to contribute to a community. And beyond production, land ownership is a cornerstone of economic stability. It's a tangible asset, a buffer against financial instability. It's a stepping stone to other opportunities, a platform for growth and development. In essence, the power of land ownership encompasses more than just the dirt under our feet. It's a symbol of independence, of stability, of potential. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, to our innate desire to shape our destiny, to carve out a space in this vast world and call it our own. Remember, the power of land ownership lies not just in its financial value, but in its potential to provide freedom, stability, and the ability to produce. So let's keep the conversation going, let's keep exploring, let's keep learning, because the story of land ownership is far from over. As we gather here today, amidst the ebb and flow of time, our hearts heavy with the weight of history, we embark on a journey of remembrance, reconciliation, and renewal. We navigate through the passage of time, focusing on a topic that has resonated deeply within our hearts for generations: reparations. This isn't just about financial redemption or materialistic pursuits, but it's about acknowledging our past, recognizing injustices borne by our forefathers, and creating a path of healing and empowerment. We've been denied our rightful history, our lineage hidden beneath layers of oppression. From us, our heritage, our culture, our identities have been stolen, scattered to the winds of time like leaves in a storm. Yet, even as we stand amidst the shadows of our collective past, we stand also upon the precipice of change, our voices raised in unison, demanding not just restitution, but restoration. We insist on the restoration of what is ours, bypassing bureaucracy, with unwavering recognition of our and dignity. Reparations, my dear brothers and sisters, must go beyond financial redress. They must involve the comprehensive restoration of our community, the return of the wealth unjustly taken from us, and the inalienable right to protect and care for our own. This call isn't about seeking handouts, it's about restoring our rightful position in society, about creating equal opportunities so that we can stand on an equal footing with our fellow citizens. We are calling for the dismantling of systems of oppression and the building of systems of support, where our voices are heard, our contributions valued, and our rights respected. We demand a society where we can live freely, a society that acknowledges our past, our present, and our future, where we can grow and prosper without the fear of prejudice or discrimination. It is not a matter of receiving a mere handout, but of reclaiming our rightful place in society, of leveling the playing field so that we may stand shoulder to shoulder with our fellow citizens, our heads held high with pride. Some may argue that the call for reparations is a relic of the past, a futile cry in the face of an uncaring world. To those, I retort, can we really advance as a society with the shackles of history still tightly wrapped around us? Can we expect a prosperous future when our present is erected on the sacrifices of our forebears, their voices muffled by the heavy hand of unfairness and disparity? Reparations, dear listeners, are not simply about redressing historic transgressions. They are a means to pave a new way forward, a way illuminated by the beacon of justice and fairness. They symbolize an investment in our shared communities, in the promise of our young, and in the dreams we harbor. They are not acts of philanthropy, but a tribute to the resilience, courage, and perseverance of our people. Reparations are about acknowledging the past while creating a brighter future. They are about acknowledging the wrongs done, embracing the lessons learned, and using that knowledge to create a society that values every member. They are about fostering sense of belonging, not just for those who have been wronged, but for all of us, because we are all part of this shared history and shared future. They are about building a society that cherishes diversity and values each contribution, big or small, about addressing past injustices, creating a world where every voice is heard, every story is honored, and every life is cherished. It is about showing the world that our efforts, our contributions, our very existence are not only valued, but cherished. With a firm and unyielding stance, we declare with one voice that enough is enough. No longer will we stand by idly as our rights and freedoms are compromised. Today, we gather from all corners of the earth, our hearts with a shared passion and our minds focused on a singular goal. We demand justice, we demand equality, we demand reparations for all. Our voices rise in unison, ringing out loud and clear, shaking the very foundations of the institutions that have oppressed us. We stand tall, our resolve unwavering, our spirits indomitable. We are unified not just in our shared suffering but in our shared determination to bring about change. to break the chains of oppression and injustice. For it's not just us we're fighting for. We demand reparations, not just for ourselves, but for our ancestors, our predecessors who toiled and suffered under the crushing weight of prejudice and discrimination. Their dreams may have been deferred, their hopes and aspirations crushed, but they were never forgotten. They live on in us, in our battle cries, in our tireless pursuit of justice. Their struggle is our struggle. Their fight is our fight. Their dreams are our dreams. We carry their legacy in our hearts, their courage in our souls, their resilience in our spirit. They have passed on the baton to us, and we will not let down. We must stand strong, resilient, and determined. We must fight and persevere. We must refuse to back down, to be silenced. We can, we must, and we will overcome.